Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The former WBO champion Joseph Parker has reached out to former undisputed champion Lennox Lewis to ask him for help. You might remember Lewis, he publicly dissected some of Parker's defensive flaws and that his right hand was too telegraphed, and this was back in August. And many fans at the time expressed a hope that potentially Lewis could be invited into Parker's camp to give him some tips, give him some help. And now that is looking likely from what Joseph Parker is saying. So at a political party conference at which Parker was speaking at, he revealed he's reached out to Lewis saying he's going to get in touch and hopefully he'll find some time for us to get together and he can give us some advice on what to work on. And on Lewis's recent comments about his flaws, Parker says, Lewis is just being honest. He says that I'm still young, there's a lot of space for improvement. He's not saying anything's wrong with our team, just that there's a few things he thinks we should work on. I sent him my number and he said he'll call me again soon. Everyone gives different advice and everyone gives something that can work. Our team's great at the moment, we're still learning. But to get the input of someone else, especially someone like Lennox, who's been at the top of the game for a long time, retired champion, it'll be good to see what he thinks. And those were Joseph Parker's statements. So my quick thoughts on this. This is a good move for Joseph Parker. Clearly he needs to make some adjustments. Some things are just not working for Joseph Parker right now. In some of Lewis's original comments back in August, he basically said some of the things that Joseph Parker is doing were pretty rudimentary mistakes about going straight back, that you know where he's going to be after he throws his punches and that you can predict where he'll be and you can hit him, throw your punches to that spot. And obviously the right hand, he said it's just too obvious when it's coming, where it's coming from. So he basically said, look, these are things that he needs to fix, and if he doesn't fix them, he's not going to, get any better results in the division. But he did say that Parker was still young at 26, and he thought, actually, he could go places and be back at the top of the division, but only if he fixes some of the mistakes that he makes. And a lot of us, I think, agree that Joseph Parker is a talent. He's obviously been champion already. That was at quite a young age. He defended the belt a couple of times, but Anthony Joshua, the bigger man, proved to be too much. And obviously since then, he's obviously lost to Dillian Whyte in a somewhat controversial fight where Joseph Parker was put down by a headbutt in the second round, and he went away from his boxing as well. And there were some rounds where Joseph Parker, he didn't seem to do enough through the middle. And I had a look at those cards again, and between rounds 6 and 8, Parker, that was the sort of the losing of the fight for me. One judge gave him 1 round there. And so on the other cards, across the 3 judges, 8 of those 9 points for those 3 rounds went to Whyte. And that ended up being the difference because Parker finished strong and the cards ended up being relatively tight. But it was the knockdown that did prove the difference and those rounds through the middle. But if Joseph Parker, if he can make some adjustments, and if he can get his fitness to a better level, then he will continue to be a contender of note in the division. And I don't think anyone is saying that Joseph Parker isn't a talent. And I have been a little surprised that some people say that Joseph Parker should retire. But, he is actually, he's only 26. And if he can take on some stuff from Lennox Lewis here, he can get better. But I guess the other thing with this is, how will Kevin Barry feel about Lennox Lewis effectively being invited in by his fighter? Is Kevin Barry okay with this? Because some of Lewis's criticisms, you could take it to be they were a little bit scathing of some of the coaching that Kevin Barry has delivered to Parker over the past 6 years that he's had Parker. Obviously, some of the things Lewis said were rudimentary things that should have been fixed, and they could be fixed quite easily. So that is a bit of a knock on the training of Kevin Barry to some extent. But if Barry is okay with this, with Lewis coming in, I think he deserves a lot of credit because obviously he's swallowing his ego and his pride to some extent to get some external help and advice to make Parker better. And after all, that's what Joseph Parker needs. He needs to keep improving if he wants to mix it at the top. And just on a potential fight for Joseph Parker, Parker's revealed we're looking at fighting in New Zealand. For us, it's to give back to the people of New Zealand for the great support they've given us from the start until now. and Parker is reportedly set to be in Las Vegas for 8 weeks for a training camp, and that would potentially mean he's expected to be fighting in December. And back in August, his promoter David Higgins had sort of said it was a 50-50 about whether an overseas fight was going to happen or whether to hold something in New Zealand. And if they are going to hold something in New Zealand, which is Joseph Parker is indicating, it would have to be announced relatively shortly. But if it is a fight in New Zealand, I'm not actually expecting it to be anyone good. And I've been saying for a little while now that Joseph Parker, he needs a win. He actually needs to build some confidence. So if it is a bit of a tune-up opponent of sorts, or a higher level journeyman, or a contender that he is expected to beat, I think it just kind of is what it is. He does need a fight against someone that he can get a win against and look good against. He needs to put a bit more air in the balloon in terms of the hype front, because it has sort of seeped out from that balloon in recent months after his losses to Anthony Joshua and then to Dillian Whyte. And he's kind of gone quite quiet after his loss to Dillian Whyte. He's been on holiday, he's been doing different bits and pieces in his personal life. But in terms of the boxing front, it's been quite quiet. And no one has really been talking about Joseph Parker, as I mentioned in a recent video. No one's really sort of looking for him, calling for him. So he needs to get back in the ring. He needs to give people a reason to watch again. And knocking someone out, that is always going to help. And he hasn't had a knockout since 2016. But in terms of this giving back to the people of New Zealand for the great support that they've given us from the start until now, that's a nice line to be peddling, and perhaps Parker believes that. But the reality of the situation is they'll be looking to fight in New Zealand because the money will be better than what they can get overseas. That's the cold, hard reality of the situation. Because after the Hughie Fury fight, well, what was meant to be the Hughie Fury fight, but ended up being the Razvan Kajanu fight back in May 2017, they basically sort of said, we're going to be campaigning overseas now. We've sort of outgrown this small pond that is New Zealand, where Joseph Parker is a big fish. We have to be off to bigger and better things, mix it in the States, mix it in the UK. And Parker has spoken at length about making the UK his actual fighting home. So the whole line about giving back to New Zealand, I think it's really a financial decision. The financial considerations have probably won out here if they do fight in New Zealand, because it will be a bigger purse. They can keep the revenue in terms of, because it will be on pay-per-view. Joseph Parker's fights in New Zealand are on pay-per-view. So he's been making pretty decent money in the context of a lot of heavyweights across the division, because he cornered the New Zealand market. His fights are on pay-per-view in Australia as well. Broadcast to the islands, Samoa and such. So he is actually quite a big boxing star in the South Pacific, and he's been making decent money, a lot better than some other guys in different parts of the world that might have been in comparable fights. He's had a lot of fights against journeymen that have been on pay-per-view. He's been on pay-per-view since about his 6th fight, I believe. So Joseph Parker, if he fights in New Zealand, it's about money. It's not really about giving back. It's the cold, hard financials have won out. Just my 2 cents on that, but what do you make of it all? Lennox Lewis coming in to help Joseph Parker. We don't know when, and presumably it would be during his training camp, if it is this year. But Lewis is apparently going to help Parker, and I think that's a good thing. And also his next fight, it does sound like it will be in New Zealand, and they're saying, to give back to the people. And no doubt they'll be giving back to us a pay-per-view event, which is, $39.95 New Zealand or $49.95 New Zealand. That's what will happen. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter. Boxing_squared. I'm out.